Welcome to your first day with two-dimensional arrays. Last unit, I showed you how you can store variables into an array list if you need lots and lots of variables just in a list. There's another way of organizing lots of variables, and that's what we're going to learn today. You can think about a two-dimensional array as being a grid of variables rather than a list of variables. So here is a two-dimensional array that holds integers, but you could have a 2D array that holds strings or other kinds of objects. Up on the upper right-hand side here, you see the line of Java that creates this array, except it doesn't actually fill it with numbers. So why don't you take a guess right now, take a guess what this int bracket bracket means, and take a guess what the 3 and what the 5 are about. So this part is the data type for the variable grid, and it follows the same pattern. Whenever we create variables, we say like string, name, int, num. So here I have int bracket bracket grid, and the int means that our two-dimensional array is going to hold integer variables. So inside each box, you can have an integer. The bracket bracket is what means two-dimensional array. My friend calls this array. So int array. And that's what you need to do every single time you declare a two-dimensional array variable. On the right-hand side of the equals, here we're actually creating the array itself. If I left this part off and I just had int bracket bracket grid, then that would be a variable that could be holding an array, but it's actually not holding anything. And the default value that it would be holding is called null. So on the right-hand side, I actually make the array, and 3 is the height of the array, and 5 is the width of the array. We usually talk in terms of rows and columns. So rows are these horizontal rows across. Columns are these vertical columns down. And the first number that you use in an array syntax is the row, and the second number is always the column. So when you first create an array, you're telling it how big it should be. You're saying, I want to make a new array that holds integers, that's 3 rows tall and 5 rows wide. Okay, it's your turn to try it. So what do you think you would have to type to make a new two-dimensional array of integers that's got a width of 10 and a height of 2? If you want to, go ahead and pause the video and actually type it out yourself. All right, here's the answer. I tried to trick you by saying the 10 first and the 2 second, but remember the width, if you look at this picture, the width is the same as the number of columns there are. So the number of columns is the second number. The number of rows would be the first number, so it would actually be 2 rows and 10 columns like this. Okay, let's do another one. What would you have to change here if we wanted to create a grid that could hold these strings? So it's 3 columns wide and 4 rows tall. How would I have to change? And it holds strings, very important. How would you have to change this? Go ahead, pause, and think about it. So you change the ints to string as a way of saying that the two-dimensional array holds string variables. And then, same as before, this first number is how tall it is, how many rows. The second number is how wide it is, how many columns. All right, so why do you actually want a two-dimensional grid? Well, it's not an accident that spreadsheets look like a two-dimensional grid, and spreadsheets are used all the time in business. A lot of data is just easily organized as a 2D grid of values. But specifically, you could have map data. Whenever you measure information in regularly spaced intervals, that would make a grid. So you can have like rainfall data or temperature data, wildfire tracking data, that was important for us recently, voter registration data, traffic data, all kinds of data. You'd have a grid, and at every grid location, you'd make some measurement, and you'd have a grid of numbers. And here, of course, it's, the grid is being rendered as a graph where you can see colors and you can see all kinds of other things. But all of the information that's letting you make the colors here is really just a grid of numbers. A really important application is images and video. You may have zoomed way in on an image and seen it become pixelated. So for the computer, every single color is represented by a number. So every single pixel is a number, and so if you've got a two-dimensional grid of pixels, the computer actually sees the right-hand side here. You see the left-hand side, but the computer just sees a grid of numbers. And that's how you do things with images. If you want to make filters for your images, for example, it's all about being able to change numbers in a big grid. And a video is just a whole bunch of two-dimensional grids of numbers, because every frame in the video is its own image. And for us, of course, there are a lot of games that are based on two-dimensional grids. Checkers, Othello, Sudoku, lots and lots of variations on Candy Crush type games. You can have a word search, which would be a two-dimensional array of strings, where each variable contains one letter. Minesweeper, that's a grid. So you can think of lots of situations, I hope, where you're using grids. Okay, why don't you come back in the next video and we'll see how to put values into a grid and how to, in general, interact with a grid a little bit.